What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about the newest Dragon Age, the Veilguard article from Game Informer. They've been doing a lot of features. In fact, Game Informer is kind of like the only one and the only reason we know so much about Dragon Age so far. So they put out an article today. I'm going to read over Shinobi over on Twitter, his kind of breakdown of it. And with the highlight, or the main thing I guess I want to talk about, is they finally admit, but I'm not like trying to like frame that a certain way. They say that they were trying out multiplayer. Now, I think there's a little bit more to that they're not going to get into, which I guess I understand it, but that would be the biggest thing I think that they discussed here, but they go over a lot of other stuff as well. So let's read over the tweet. And again, originally from Game Informer, we're going to go over Shinobi's breakdown of it. Spent a lot of time experimenting and iterating in pre-production, tried multiplayer, but they felt it wasn't true to the studio's route. They say, we really felt multiplayer wouldn't do that, but single-player RPG is really where we wanted to spend our time, says their general manager. Team is comprised of seasoned veterans that have been there since Dragon Age Origins, as well as new voices and perspectives. BioWare's greatest strength is storytelling through characters, and they built Veilguard intentionally around putting the characters first. Storytelling through animation is something new that Veilguard is doing, where characters are unique in motion/visuals rather than everyone animating and looking the same standing next to each other. The studio is much more confident and knowledgeable using Frostbite this time around. The team worked hard so the game respects and references previous games in the series without players needing to have played them to understand what's going on. There are definitely moments in callbacks to previous Dragon Age games, but like those games, Veilguard is its own story, cast of characters, etc. And Veilguard is all about places that Dragon Age hinted at in the past, but now we actually get to visit these places. So, again, I think some pretty good information, and I mean, we haven't talked too much. Like, again, the Game Informer's done a lot of these breakdowns. It's all sounding pretty good, when they go over some of like the romance stuff, like it's sounding good. What we saw was divisive. What we saw, I think we need to see more of, but we've heard a lot of good things, and that tends to be like how it's going, right? Like Star Wars Outlaws looks iffy at times depending on what you've looked at, but everything they're saying sounds really good. Now, it's easy to say things, right? Harder to actually, perform them in the game. So, Dragon Age is a game I've said before. I think it can be, if everything came together, it could be a Game of the Year contender. Like this, it needs to be big. BioWare needs to, get it right at the end of the day. But I think if everything comes together, you could be looking at a really great game. Now, the question is, will that happen? So I do want to address that multiplayer part first. So what I find interesting, right, is that if you follow the rumors, it very much seemed like multiplayer was forced on them. Now, they're presenting it more like, well, it was an experiment, right? Like they were experimenting a lot of different things early on. Multiplayer was one of them, and it just didn't work out. Remember, the multiplayer in Dragon Age, though, was around the time of the statement of like single-player games are dying, and they were pushing, EA was pushing for these studios to do things that, in my opinion, just didn't make a lot of sense and ultimately did not work. So I think there's a little truth there, and there's also a little bit of cover-up, I think, going on. I mean, what can you do? I'm not, like, going after them or anything, but I think multiplayer was kind of forced on them. They tried it. They realized it's not going to work, whether they presented that to executives or not, right? And then they were eventually, let go. I mean, remember, that was the reporting. I think it was even Jason Schreier that said, like, EA backed off. They let them change it from multiplayer to single-player, and that's why we thought, okay, Dragon Age is back on track. Like, they didn't get too deep into multiplayer where they would ruin the game or anything, right? And then, the veteran thing I do think is important. I've seen people, like, in the comments of these things talking about, again, like, how many of them are around. I think what you've really seen, like, I see it more with Mass Effect, but I think I pay attention to Mass Effect a little bit more than Dragon Age, just to I guess, be honest about it. I do see a lot of like returning faces, right? Like the Mass Effect team is really trying to get people that did like the original trilogy back. You're not going to get all of them. It's something we've talked about before where, if you have like a legendary game, right? Like you think back to, we had Suicide Squad, that whole situation, right? You think to those Arkham games with Rocksteady, and then even before you saw what Suicide Squad was, that Rocksteady's different. Like it has the legacy of Arkham, but it's not necessarily the same people. Now, yeah, maybe a couple of them or maybe a couple dozen, but as time goes on, just less and less of those people are around unless they make an active like recruitment choice to bring them back. So, Dragon Age, they say they have people that worked, from the first game on, and I'm sure they do. The question would be like how many, but I'm not saying you can't have a blend. I think a blend is important. You probably do want new voices, but you also want that confidence that, you have these people that have been there and done it. They know the franchise. That's very important for people, right? For the respect factor and all that jazz. And again, I'm glad that was addressed too. A lot of what was addressed is good. Like even throwing in the multiplayer thing is like, okay, so they kind of admit it, but they're not going to make too big of a deal about it. And the rest of it is like, hey, like we feel confident. We're going with the strength of BioWare. And I would agree. I think to Dragon Age, I think to Mass Effect, I think the strength, and even, I guess if you go back even further, you go to like KOTOR and stuff, right? The strength is the characters. Like the characters are normally very, very good, at least most of them, and they can be very deep. And that is, to care about the story, you also have to care about the characters. Mass Effect, I think, is my favorite franchise they've ever made. Like I have to care about Tali, and you have to care about Shepard, you have to care about all of these characters in order to for the impact of like the end of the universe and all that stuff to really land home. And the characters tell such great stories, and that's where all those very deep side missions and those relationships and some of the bonds that you have with those characters in Dragon Age, in Mass Effect, they last, and people still think about them, and there's fan art and all that stuff. They're so impactful, and so that really is, I do believe, that is the strength. I'm glad they realized that, and I don't think that was really present in games like Andromeda or Anthem or things like that. So good to go back to the basics, I guess, from time to time. But no, another solid article, another solid amount of information. We need to see one more kind of wave, though. I'm not going to let that part go. We've heard a lot of good things. Gamescom is around the corner. Do we see it there? Do we see it maybe in September? The game probably comes out, like mid to late November. They got one more big chance, to show it, and there'll be stuff afterwards. But, I think a lot of people have maybe already made their opinion and their mind up based off of what they already saw. But we need a little bit more. I need a little bit more. I'm still going to get it day one, but it's a game that I don't feel very confident on, but I don't feel like there's no hope. I'm kind of like right in the middle. I'm not going to come out here and say, oh yeah, this game, a lot of people do that. The game's a complete disaster. It's going to fail just based off that gameplay. But then you also have people that kind of just blindly, oh, I don't care what's shown, it's going to be absolutely amazing. No, I'll go right in the middle and say there's potential there, but also, what we've seen has been a little 50-50. We need to see a little bit more. Let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.